So now we move on to Article 25 of the Constitution, and these articles now are on the freedom of freedom to practice religion, the right to practice religion, the fundamental rights with respect to that. So Article 25 talks about freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. Now the state can has the right to regulate the free practice subject to public order, morality and health. So any of these three grounds, the state is free to regulate religious practice as well. Furthermore, state has the power to regulate economic, financial, political activities which are associated with religious practice, and they also have the power to throw open religious institutions to all classes of society. So if we talk about the subjecting the right to freely practice religion to public order, morality and health, a very apt example would be if we take the example of Bakri Eid. So there you cannot sacrifice the goats in public places. So any sacrifices of animals which is a part of the religion, it is regulated in the sense that that sacrifice has to be take place in private places of the persons. It can't be done in public places because that affects the health and public order, etc. So that is a manner in which the state is empowered to regulate religious practice. And then if we move on to throwing open religious institutions to all classes of society, so if you are aware, earlier in ancient times and like even as recent as colonial times, there was a practice that scheduled caste, scheduled tribes or the lower caste Hindus would not have access to temples. So this clause gives power to the state to throw open all religious institutions to all classes of society. So even tomorrow, say the government comes out with a new law saying that all mosques have to be open to women also. Currently, women are not allowed in mosques. So that law could be validated through this clause. So this is how this clause is used. Next we have Article 26. Now this gives freedom to persons to manage their religious affairs, and even this right is subject to public order, morality and health. Now every religious denomination has the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes. They have the right to manage their own affairs in matters of religion. They have the right to own and acquire movable and immovable property, and they have the power to administer such property in accordance with law. Now all of these rights can be subject to public order, morality and health. So Article 26 is pretty clear. So let's move on to Article 27. Now this says that there is a freedom as to payment of taxes for promotion of any particular religion. So what this article means is that no citizen can be compelled to pay a tax for the promotion of any particular religion, or in other words, the government cannot impose a tax for the promotion of any particular religion. So for tomorrow the government cannot come out with a new law saying that everyone needs to pay 1% tax to which will be used to provide subsidies for any religious activity, or will be used to set up new temples or any of that sort. So this is what Article 27 deals with. So now let's move on to Article 28. So now we come on to the cultural and educational rights. This provides that no religious instruction shall be provided in education institutions maintained wholly by the state. So in any municipal school, religious instruction, either Hindu religion, Muslim religion, any religion, religious instruction is completely prohibited. So this is in keeping with the secular value of our constitution. So this can be seen as an extension of that value. So next we have Article 29, and this provides that any section of citizens having a distinct language, script or culture have a right to conserve the same, and no citizen can be denied admission in educational institutions maintained by state or receiving aid out of state funds only on grounds of religion, race, caste, language or any of them. So again, this prohibition on discrimination against any person is there only if the discrimination is on any of the prescribed grounds. So if there are any other considerations along with any of the specified grounds, then that discrimination may be valid, like it is subject to the facts and facts of that case, but it may be valid. But in case if it is if the discrimination is only on the grounds of religion, race, caste, etc., then it is void and it is unconstitutional. So and like the idea behind this is to because India there are so many distinct cultures, it is to ensure minority rights. So any minority class has the right to preserve their own language, etc. So next we have Article 30, and this gives the religious and linguistic minorities the right to establish and administer educational institutions. So this is in keeping with the earlier article, and it seeks to preserve and promote the minorities' cultural and educational rights, etc. So the minority culture can sustain, because otherwise in normal educational institutions no one would be teaching that language. That is the idea behind it. This is a manner in which you can preserve this culture. So now let's move on to Article 32, and this is the right to move the Supreme Court for enforcement of rights conferred under Part 3. So we can also move the High Court for enforcement of rights of our fundamental rights. That is under Article 226, and both the Supreme Court and the High Court will have powers to issue writs. Now writs are of 5 natures. Firstly, we have habeas corpus. What habeas corpus means is to produce the person, basically. So habeas corpus is used in the cases of illegal detention. So if you know, after Jammu and Kashmir, Article 370 was the special status was taken away, and the government took all the Jammu and Kashmir leaders into custody. A lot of habeas corpus petitions were filed in the Supreme Court and what that does is, then the court asks the government, by what authority did you the court will check whether the detention of a person was legal or not. So that is the idea behind habeas corpus. Next we have mandamus. Now mandamus is the power of the court to issue directions to any authority. So if for example the government is not doing something, then doing something to enforce your fundamental rights, to provide your fundamental rights, then you can approach the court for seeking directions from the court to the government for them to do or abstain from doing an act. So that is what mandamus means. Next we have prohibition. Yes, so our prohibition, writ of prohibition says that is issued against the lower court when the Supreme Court finds that the or when the higher court is finds that the lower court is doing something over which it has no authority. So in case the lower court is proceeding with an act over which it has no jurisdiction, with a case over which it has no jurisdiction, then the Supreme Court can issue this writ of prohibition against that. Writ of quo warranto is for the writ of quo warranto is the court will ask the authority or the court, by what authority have you done some act, by if what rule gives you the power to do or do some act. So that is quo warranto. Then and lastly, certiorari is when the court is modifying any order of a lower court, or it is, yeah, so that is the idea. Certiorari, the court is sitting in judicial review and it will change any decision of the lower court. So these are the 5 writs which the Supreme Court and also the High Court is empowered to issue under Article 32 and 226 respectively. So now let's move on to directive principles of state policy. These are provided under Part 4 of our Constitution. They are provided under Article 36 to Article 51, and they are not enforceable, but they are the principles by which the country is governed. So, for example, under this, it provides that India will be a welfare state. So all these subsidies etc. which the government provides is flowing from these directive principles. Another directive principle which is well known is that there will be a uniform civil code. Unfortunately, till today no government has taken steps to come out with that, but that is one of the other directive principles of the state policy. Now another big tussle between the judiciary and the government was with relation to how the fundamental rights should be treated with the directive principles of state policy. So as I told you, with the social welfare ideology of the Congress government of that time, it went against the fundamental right to property as existed earlier under Article 19(1)(g) and Article 31. So if the government said that all the laws which we are getting, the land ceiling laws, we are getting to implement the directive principles of state policies. So according to them, the directive principles of state policies would override fundamental rights. So it was in this context that the question first arose that when there is a conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, which of the two will supersede the other. But the court held that it cannot be that one is better than the other. Both have to be harmoniously construed, and and one cannot be allowed to override the other, right? So that is what the situation is currently, and especially after the right to property was removed as a fundamental right, this conflict has died down. Now right to property is a constitutional right under Article 300A. So yeah, this was an overview of the Constitution for you, and now let's move on to one of the illustrations. So this was also asked in this CLAT 2020. So I'll just read out the passage. It says that Article 21 of the Indian Constitution prohibits ex post facto laws. The expression ex post facto laws means a law which imposes penalties or convictions on the acts already done and increases the penalty for such acts. In other words, Ex post facto law imposes penalties retrospectively. For example, the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 came into force from 25/1961. A person guilty of accepting dowry is punishable under the act after 25/1961 and not before 25/1961.
Hey guys, just a short break in the middle of the class to tell you to check out our website or follow the link in the description below to join our test series. We're going to be having sectional tests, full tests, a lot of practice material. Do check out our website. Cheers.
Ex post facto laws are of three kinds. A law which declared some act or omission as an offence for the first time after the completion of that act or omission. B. A law which enhances the punishment or penalty for an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. And C. A law which prescribes a new and different procedure for the prosecution of an offence subsequent to the commission of that offence. Clause 1 Clause 1 of Article 20 provides protection only in respect of the above first two categories of ex post facto laws, that is, laws which declare acts as offences subsequent to the commission to those acts, and laws which enhance the penalty subsequently. So, the procedural changes are not covered under Article 21 basically. Article 20 Clause 1. Article 20 Clause 1 provides, no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offence, nor be subjected to a penalty greater than that which might have been inflicted under the law in force at the time of the commission of the offence. The first part of Clause 1 provides that no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of law in force at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offence. The second part of Clause 1 protects a person from a penalty greater than that which he might have been subjected to at the time of commission of the offence. Now, ex post facto, these are the important points which are, so this is the end of the passage. So I suggest that you guys, if you want, you can pause the video here, rewind, read the passage at your own pace and cull out the important points for the passage and then compare them to the ones which I have found. So this is how you will improve your improve your exercise and improve your skills. So moving on, the important points which I have identified from the passage. So firstly, ex post facto law means a law imposing penalty retrospectively. Two ex post facto laws are of three types. Firstly, a law which declared some act or an omission as an offence for the first time after the completion of that act. B, a law which enhances the punishment or penalty subsequently. C, law which prescribes a new and different procedure for prosecution of an offence. Only the first two clauses are covered. And 5, no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of commission of the act. And it also protects a person from a penalty greater than that which he might have been subjected to at the time of the commission of the offence. So these are the important points which are provided in the passage. So basically, if a person, the examples I gave you while explaining Article 20, if I plant if today I plant a tree, tomorrow the government comes out with a law saying that planting a tree there is an offence, I will not be punished for that. And secondly, also if today if I planted a tree, the punishment for that was only 100 rupees. If tomorrow the government comes out with a law saying that the punishment for planting a tree here is going to be 2 lakh rupees. Now that extra punishment cannot be levied on me because I planted the tree one day earlier. So I can only be imposed with a penalty of 100 rupees. So this is the idea behind what the passage is saying. Now let's move on to the questions. The first question is, the Parliament of India legislated the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act in the year 2013, and simultaneously some new offences were also added to the Indian Penal Code 1860. Mr. A is an employee of an institution against whom departmental inquiry has been initiated for committing sexual harassment of a female colleague in the year 2012. Now choose the correct option. Such inquiry is valid as per Article 21 of the Constitution, as the complaint was made after the Act came into force. Article 21 will not be applicable as the matter does not relate to an offence. As the Act was passed in the year 2013, any inquiry under such Act is invalid. D. Only inquiry can be conducted, but no penal action can be taken against him after such inquiry. Now, if you are aware of the principles, the correct answer should be apparent as so just attempt the answer. Let's see if you got it right. So the correct option is option D, as Article 20 only prohibits retrospective punishment, and as it said that if a procedural change is brought in, the you can certainly apply a new procedure for the prosecution of that person. It is only the punishment which cannot be applied retrospectively. So if we go back to the question, it said that the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act was brought in at 2013, and new offences were also added. Now after that, the initiation of the complaint was in 2012, the inquiry. Now the inquiry can certainly continue, right? There's no prohibition against that inquiry. Now can he be punished under the Indian Penal Code? That cannot be done. So option D was the correct option, because it said that only inquiry may be conducted but no penal action can be taken. So let's move on to the next question. Article 21 would not affect which of the following acts of the legislature? A. Act of the legislature enhancing the term of imprisonment. B. Act of the legislature enhancing the amount of fine. C. Act of the legislature changing the punishment of death to life imprisonment. And D. Act of legislature changing the nature of imprisonment from simple to rigorous. So again, the correct option should be very obvious. This is a very simple question. Just think for a minute and I'm sure you will be able to get the correct option. So the correct option is option C, right? Because all the other options are increasing the penalty subsequently. It is only option C which is reducing the quantum of punishment. C is changing punishment of death to life imprisonment. And as I told you, a person will certainly get the benefit of, any person will get a benefit of a change in law, right? It is only when the change is affecting his rights adversely will Article 20 come into force. So in the other three, the legislature is enhancing the punishment. In option C, the legislature is reducing the quantum of punishment. So the person will so Article 20 will not apply to option C. So let's go to the next question. Mr. A is a student of law aged 19 years. He is socially active and expresses his opinions on every social and political event of the nation through social media platforms. Now in one of his blogs, he severely criticized the policy of a state government of changing names of cities and towns. He has also stated that the government is biased towards a particular religion. Now, excuse me, the said blogs was posted on 19th April 2020, and subsequently an amendment was made to Indian Penal Code whereby hate speech was made a distinct offense and punishment was prescribed. Now an action was brought against him under the said provision of the blog. Now choose the most appropriate option amongst the following. A. Mr. A may be liable for the offense of hate speech as the blog was not removed even after the amendment. B. Mr. A may be liable for the offense of hate speech as Article 21 does not cover such areas. C. Mr. A may not be liable for the offense because the act was done before the amendment. And D. Mr. A may not be liable for the offense as his blog was innocent and a fair criticism. Now this is a little tricky question, but just think over it for a minute. Look at the options, and you will be able to eliminate certain options. So in tricky questions, what you can do is, if you're not 100% sure of what the correct answer is, eliminate the ones which are which cannot be right. For example, option D. Option D is something which what option D says is that blog was innocent and a fair criticism. Now this was nowhere mentioned in the passage. This is not a ground even related to Article 20, so that option is out. Now the other ones, so remains option A, B and C. Now the correct option is option A. Now I'll tell you why. This is because remember that a blog is means that something which is published online, right? And that will that is continuing to be in existence. So it is a continuous action. Whereas if he had actually just made a speech earlier and then if a new law had come, it would be different, right? There's a difference between the two, because when it is online, it is still and then a law is changed, the blog is continuing to being in existence. So even from the day the new law is brought in, the blog is in existence, thus the offense is continuing. So that is why option A will be correct, because he may be liable for the offense. It is not saying he will 100% be liable for the offense, depends on the facts and circumstances, but he may be liable as the blog was not removed even after the amendment. Hence option A is the correct option. So next, let's say that considering the facts and situations given in the above question, so the same facts as above, Parliament passes a legislation in September 2020 whereby an amendment is made to the Juvenile Act, and now a person below the age of 20 would be a juvenile and special procedure would be followed for his trial. Choose the most appropriate option. A. Mr. A would not be considered as juvenile as it is prohibited under scheme of Article 20. B. Mr. A would not be considered as juvenile because the amendment came after he committed the crime. C. Mr. A would be considered a juvenile and tried under the new procedure. D. None of the above. So again, this is a simple question. Just attempt it, and the correct option is option C, because the passage repeatedly said that if a change in procedure retrospectively is not covered under Article 20. Hence, because this is just a change in procedure and it empowers you to be tried as a juvenile under till you attain the age of 20, thus he will get the benefit of that law, and because it is just a change in procedure, 20 will not apply and he would be considered a juvenile. Next question, considering the fact situation in the third question to this passage, which is the same hate speech blog, the Parliament passes a legislation for the probation of offenders, under which any offender below the age of 21 will not serve the sentence of imprisonment in a prison. Instead, he will serve the sentence in a probation house. Now choose the most appropriate option. A. Mr. A will get the benefit of Probation of Offenders Act. B. Mr. A will not get the benefit of Probation Offenders Act as it is prohibited by Article 21 of the Constitution. C. It is discretion of Mr. A to decide whether he wants such benefit or not. D. None of the above. So again, this is a simple question. So the correct option should be option A, because as I earlier told you, this is a retrospectively giving a person a benefit. So at any time where a person is getting a benefit, the law, the constitution will never stop it. Article 20 will not come into force when a person is getting a benefit. So as I said, A. So yeah, thank you. That was the end of our lecture on constitution. With this, this is the end of the legal part of our series. In my next and final lecture on legal reasoning, we will be solving the entire legal reasoning section of CLAT, and I will try and show you the practical working of all the aspects and how you should go about solving the questions. Yeah, look forward to seeing you then, and please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be coming out with a lot of new material on the other sections of CLAT as well. And yeah, best of luck to you. And again, if you have any doubts, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and we'll be sure to respond to them. Yeah, thank you.